The Mind's Eye with Brian Turnoff is available on Stitcher Radio, iTunes, and all major platforms. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. Feed your head, engage your brain, and enter the Mind's Eye. You are now standing at the intersection of history and mystery, science and the strange, and crime and the sublime. I'm DJ BJ Turnoff, your host of this auditorium of audacity. It is summertime, finally. You smell it, summer romance is in the air, and hopefully you're not vomiting right now, but it is vacation time for a lot of people, and this is the time when couples are really starting to do things together. And for some couples, they want to add a little extra twist to their relationship with a little spike of adrenaline rush. For some, it's an adventurous trip to Patagonia. For others, it's a new type of kinky foreplay. On this edition, I'm going to tell you about one couple who sadly really took it to the next level and had deadly consequences for those who got mixed up around them. You're going to meet Martha Beck, once a young nurse dedicated to healing others. She is comically now quoted as saying, "I chose this profession without thought of self, not for material gains, but for the purpose of aiding humanity and rendering service to others." Well, not too long after that quote, her own hurting heart led her down a darker path to murder with criminal Raymond Fernandez and ultimately the electric chair. Best-selling true crime author and attorney J.T. Hunter, he's going to tell you the tale of Tortured with Love, the true crime romance of the Lonely Hearts Killers, when the Mind's Eye returns. We're back on the Mind's Eye. Appreciate you sticking around. Like we said before, it's that time where people start doing some summer sojourns, and for two teenage girls, a recent summer adventure turned into a pretty chilling one when they discovered a suitcase filled with some body parts. The two teens were led to the suitcase on the Seattle beach by an app called Randonautica, which, if you follow me, uses a random number generator to produce coordinates within a radius of the user's choice. Now, according to Wired magazine, it is an app that encourages users to explore the world around them with specific intention in hopes of uncovering synchronicities, coincidences, or occurrences outside of the usual patterns of experience. Shit, if that's not a Mind's Eye thing, I don't know what the hell is. We'll keep you updated if police eventually determine the cause of death and ID the body or possible bodies. But for right now, you can read more about the details on our Facebook and Twitter pages at Mind's Eye Show, or just go to our website, themindseyemedia.com. Prepare yourself, because chopped up body parts is not too far off from some of the things that you're going to hear tonight about Raymond Fernandez and Martha Beck, what they did for love, what they did for love, what they did for love. The true crime romance of the Lonely Hearts Killers with author J.T. Hunter after this quick commercial break. Attorney, college professor, best-selling true crime author, Renaissance man. Did I forget anything, J.T.?
I think that covers the gambit.
What does the J.T. stand for, by the way?
It's just initials.
I gather that from the letters. It sounds like you don't really want to say, so.
No, it's Joel Thomas.
All right, sounds good. I won't call you either. We'll stick with JT. How many serial killers are estimated right now to be currently roaming the U.S. and I guess globally as well?
That I couldn't tell you. I do know that they're not as busy as they used to be because of the advances in, forensic science and DNA and all that stuff. Typically what happens now is that the folks that would go on and, possibly become serial killers and be killing over and over again, they tend to get caught a lot sooner now than they did back in the old days, so to speak. So that's why, before we had a lot of the use of the DNA back in the 80s was kind of the heyday of a lot of serial killers because, they could keep killing and killing and killing and not be linked to the crimes as easily. So,
and thinking about staying with that old school cases, your latest book, Tortured with Love, the true crime romance of the Lonely Hearts Killers, it examines a historical true crime case. You've done famous cases, ones like Israel Keyes, Gainesville Ripper. What attracted you to American serial killer couple Raymond Fernandez and Martha Beck?
I just thought it was an interesting story, and there were a few aspects of it, I guess, that really kind of lured me in. One of them is really, even though it's an older story, as you said, it's kind of this historical case to the story. A lot of that took place back in the mid-40s, late 40s, early 50s. But even though it's an older story, I really think what's going on in it really still resonates today. Love is really a big theme of the story, and what people are willing to do in the name of love, what they're willing to do for passion, what they're willing to do for someone that, that they're emotionally invested in. And, that's something that we still see all the time today. So it's a story that really can reach, I think, a lot of people, in that it's something that affects everybody.
I'm going to flip that question on you. What's the worst thing that love has ever made you do, JT?
Probably would be those 5 people that I killed one time.
That's
No,
it?
joking.
Only 5? Oh, jeez.
No, I mean,
You don't call that
done
love.
my share of things that I'm not proud of. But it's anybody really is capable, if their loved one is threatened or the right situation. I mean, anybody's really capable of just about anything, really, under the right circumstances.
This couple, Raymond Fernandez, Martha Beck, they're dubbed the Lonely Hearts Killers. Would you say, in your opinion at least, are they the most notorious serial killer couple?
And actually in the book, I reference a ranking that Time magazine did, ranking like the kind of the most famous, or I guess infamous, really you should say, crime couples. And these two, Martha Beck and Raymond Fernandez, they were ranked up there pretty high, number 4 after some real famous ones. So to have couples involved with serial killing, it's kind of a different aspect to it. It makes it a little more interesting because, typically when you think of serial killers, you're thinking of men, right? Typically what you associate, like a Ted Bundy or something. So to have a woman involved in it makes it a little interesting. I mean, there's been women serial killers certainly in history, but a lot less frequent than men.
Sadly, on this one is that, woman serial killer, couple serial killer is hitting all these unusual beats that you generally don't see. And that's probably explains why there's been media obsession with it ever since, really. So using Lonely Hearts ad is a classic criminal methodology, which the couple used here. Define really what that is and how these ads are used to conduct these, crimes.
Well, so back at the time that these events took place, of course it was before computers were being used, before we had, the web. But what I kind of liken it to is what we have today with these online dating sites, where people can go online and read about potential love interests and, get to see their picture and all that kind of stuff. And so what these Lonely Hearts ads were, these were clubs that were set up all across the country. There were many, many of them around the country. And what they would do is they would maintain a list of members. The membership list would include, of course, the women's and men's names, also information about them, height, weight, all that kind of stuff, age, but also more personal information, including what their finances were like oftentimes. So oftentimes what you would have in these Lonely Hearts clubs would be, frequently older women, oftentimes maybe widows. This happened in the years following World War II. So, some of these women had lost their husbands in the war, some of them afterwards. But you would have the listing of the names and the personal information and the financial information often listed there as well. And so what would happen is they would put advertisements in different magazines, basically saying something like, are you lonely? You don't need to be. Join our club and be like one of the many in the past who have successfully found new love, something along those lines. And so what you would do is, if you're interested in the club, you would write in to the club, sending in basically like your membership fee. And in return of that, the club would then send you an application. You would fill it out with all your information. And then they would also send you a list of other club members that you could peruse with all this information on it. And then you could decide which folks on there you want to try to contact. And then you would, back then, you would write a letter to them, introduce yourself. And, then typically there would be correspondence back and forth over a period of time.
Raymond Fernandez said he killed up to 17 people. Some reports go up to 20. What number did you find, and why is there a discrepancy in the reporting at all?
Well, after the two of them were arrested, they were suspected as possibly being involved in all sorts of cases, multiple jurisdictions, different states all across the country. But, they weren't able to, law enforcement wasn't able to tie them, definitively to all of those. As you said, they were suspected of committing many, many more, but they weren't tied to them. So, the ones that they definitively tied them to are the ones that are covered in the book in the most depth, which would be, there was a woman and her young daughter in Michigan, and then there was a widow in New York. So they know for sure they killed those three. In fact, they admitted to it in different times in different fashions. They changed their story quite a bit, which is another thing that's addressed in the book as well. But they definitively tied them to those three. There was another woman whose death that they are tied to. And then before Raymond Fernandez met Martha Beck, he's also linked to the death of another woman that he was with when he was over in Spain. This was a woman he met in the U.S. and that accompanied him over to Spain, and she died over there while she was with him under the suspicious circumstances. So he's linked to that death as well. So they're definitively linked to a handful of them there, 5 or 6 or so. And then, as you said, suspected of potentially being involved in many others.
I always like to save some space for the victims. Let's just pay our respect a bit here before we do that deeper dive. Just tell us a little bit about the victims.
The story focuses largely on the murder of a widow from New York. And that's really one of the two crimes that really led to the arrest of Ray and Martha. So Janet Faye was her name. And as I said, she was a widow in New York that Ray Fernandez met through Lonely Hearts, one of the Lonely Hearts clubs that he was a member of. He was a member of, multiple clubs. And he met her through that and started corresponding with her, kind of his usual MO. He would try to really get close to them as quickly as possible. Martha, by this time, was posing as Ray's sister and would accompany him when Ray would meet these women. They met Janet Faye and hit it off, so to speak. Ray got close to her quickly as possible, brought up the idea of marriage. Again, what are you willing to do for love? In this case, this woman's willing to hand over her life savings to this guy that, she's really only known for a matter of weeks. So that's the first victim, Janet Faye. And then from there, there's another 2 victims in Michigan that ultimately leads to the capture of Ray and Martha. Delphine Downing. She was a younger widow. She was 41 in Michigan, and she had a young daughter. Both of them ended up being killed by Ray and Martha. And shortly after those murders, that's when Ray and Martha were arrested.
And I want to circle back to that point, but before we do, I want to go a little bit more into the background and the psychopathy of these individuals. Was there any indication in their early childhood that they would become who they would become?
Not really. And, there's definitely some significant events that occurred in their lives that looking back on it, that you could point to as possibilities for influencing what they would later become. In Ray Fernandez's case, he came from a family with a very strict father. When he was younger, he did have some run-ins with the law. But from there, nothing of any significance. He goes over to Spain, meets a girl there in Spain, a woman in Spain, and marries her. They have a child, starts raising the family. But then he gets caught up in world events. Spanish Civil War actually breaks out while he's over there. So he's stuck in Spain, can't leave, even though he wants to come back to the U.S. for work. And he ends up getting basically forced to fight in the Civil War. And while he's doing that, he's on the front lines. And so he sees a lot of horrific things, as you might imagine. He saw people he knew, friends, horribly killed. Even more significantly, perhaps, after the war, he was, on a ship finally bound back for the U.S., and the ship encountered a really bad storm at sea and started taking on water and started sinking, and wave hit the ship. And as a result of the force of that wave, a really heavy steel hatch door was knocked loose, and came flying down and landed right on top of him, struck him right in the head, made an indentation in his skull, really, and left him with a really long scar. Friends and family who knew him said that after that event occurred, his personality changed. He became much more prone to acts of violence and more irritable and these sorts of things. So, it's very likely that this particular event was something that damaged his brain, his frontal lobe there. Damage to the frontal lobe can have this effect on a person. It can really seriously alter someone's personality, make them completely different than what they used to be, almost a Jekyll and Hyde kind of transformation. That point is really something that really entered into the equation for how he came to get really involved in the crimes that he did ultimately. So that's kind of a little background on Ray Fernandez. And then Martha Beck, again, she didn't really have anything in her early background that would indicate she was going to go on to be involved in these kind of crimes. Quite the opposite, actually. She did pretty well in school, and she was fairly responsible, and she was pretty quiet. She had some bad things happen to her when she was younger. She had an uncle that molested her when she was young. And then when she was a little bit older, when she was about 13, she was raped by her own brother twice. So that was certainly something that would, again, have some sort of traumatic impact on her, you would think. So that happened when she was younger. So she had these kind of events happen to her when she was growing up, but she never had any kind of run-ins with the law. She wasn't stealing things, certainly. She wasn't out doing anything like that. And, chances are really, if she hadn't met Ray Fernandez, there's really a really great chance, she never would have ended up doing anything like she ended up doing. If you look back at it, what really drove her was these feelings of love she had for him. She was really willing to do anything for him. She just wanted to make him happy. She wanted him to love her. And so, to win that love, win that kind of approval from him, she was willing to do anything. And that's really drew her in or sucked her into the crimes that were being done.
With Raymond Fernandez, he was a pretty successful con man using these ads. And he claimed that his power came from black magic and voodoo. Describe the events that lead up to this belief and how he learned and picked up, this idea.
After he got out of the hospital from the accident I talked about on the ship with having this brain injury, he took a job on another ship, another tanker, to make his way ultimately back to the U.S. And when the ship did get back, when he was getting ready to leave, when he was packing up his stuff, the other crew members that were still there were doing the same thing, and he noticed that they were stealing linens and towels and these sorts of things. And so he saw that and he thought, well, why not? So he took some as well. And of course he got caught going through customs. He was facing criminal penalties for stealing government property. He was advised to enter a guilty plea because he'd get a lenient sentence. Took this advice and pled guilty and ended up getting a pretty severe sentence. He got a sentence of over a year in federal prison. And so he served that time in Tallahassee, Florida. And while he was there, he became friendly with his cellmate, who was a Haitian and who actually was actively practicing the Voodoo religion. while he was there, he got really interested in this. He got a hold of William Seabrook's book that features voodoo, called The Magic Island, about voodoo in Haiti. He became really interested in this, fascinated by this supposed power of hypnotism and black magic that came along with this voodoo. So he started dabbling in that, and he became convinced that he could use this power, that he could wield this kind of voodoo power. And one of the things that kind of bolstered this in his mind was he wrote the sentencing judge in his case, requesting a reduced sentence, and sure enough, the judge granted it. So reduced his sentence, cut it in half. He attributed this success to kind of this voodoo power of persuasion that he was able to have on the judge. After he was arrested, this is something he talked about at times, about how he used this power to influence all the different women that he was conning and fleecing from their monies and things. That this voodoo power allowed him to do it.
How did these two psychopaths connect?
After Ray got out of prison, he went to live with his sister in New York. And while he was there, he was thumbing through a magazine she had in her house, and he came across an advertisement in that magazine, and it was one of these Lonely Hearts Clubs. And he read it and contacted the advertiser, female members, and he went through that and identified women that he thought might be easy targets for him. And he planned on trying to strike up supposed romantic relationships with them, all in the name, of course, of fleecing them, taking their money ultimately. So this is how he eventually met Martha Beck. And he was really drawn to her name in particular because her full name was Martha Seabrook Beck, using her maiden name as her middle name there. So he saw that as a good omen since Seabrook had written the Magic Island, the Voodoo book that he had so closely studied while he was there in federal prison. And they, of course, started exchanging letters back and forth over, it ended up being a period of months. During this period, he went back to Spain with another woman he had met through another Lonely Hearts Club. As I mentioned earlier, while he was there, this other woman died under suspicious circumstances over there, and then he took off and got out of there and came back to the U.S. When he got back into the country, he was sent a telegram to Martha Beck and said, I have to meet you. I can't wait anymore. Let's meet. Just a few days before Christmas, Martha went to the train station there in Pensacola, Florida, and met Raymond there at the station. Right away, she was really struck by him. She was a fan of an actor at the time, Charles Boyer. Martha Beck was really enamored with this actor. And when Ray stepped off the train, she was just immediately struck by how much he looked like this actor that she loved so much. Even the way that Ray moved, walked, and talked was also very similar. So, right off the bat there, I mean, to Martha, it was like this famous actor had literally stepped off the screen into her life. So she was right away just, love at first sight with Ray. And so that's how they met.
And Martha didn't really have so much money, but you said that she was kind of, pretty much in love with him at first sight, but there was probably a few other women who kind of had that feeling as well. Why was she able to switch from possible victim to accomplice?
Well, she was extremely persistent with Ray. And, and one thing to kind of point out too there is that, when Ray saw Martha for the first time, it wasn't quite what he expected either, because Martha, she was a kind of a larger woman, certainly not petite by any stretch of the imagination. So when Ray saw her, there was going to be a little bit of disappointment as far as that goes, because it wasn't quite what he had expected. But he kind of made an excuse to get out of town there after a day or two of staying with her. He said he had to get back to New York for business, and left. And Martha wasn't too happy about that. She'd grown really close to him in that day or two that he was there, and of course was, as I said, just kind of swept up with him emotionally, romantically as well. So She ended up following him back up to New York with her. She had 2 young kids, and so she ended up following him back up to New York and took her kids up there with her. He basically kind of wouldn't leave him alone. I'm almost liken it almost to kind of like a stalking sort of thing. He just eventually decided that he was going to let her stick around, but kind of laid down an ultimatum. He let her know what was going on, what he was doing with these clubs. And he told her that, you can stay with me, but here's the deal. If you're going to stay with me, you can't interfere with what I'm doing. She was so wound up with him that she signed off on that, so to speak. That's kind of how they got started with their team approach to duping these other women.
She sent her 4 children away. I mean, that goes against almost every single motherly instinct that you could think of. What did Beck's children say about her later on?
I didn't really come across a whole lot about her children. I didn't really try to track her children down because they were pretty young when all this happened. So there wasn't really much there as far as what the children felt about this. I mean, I'm sure they weren't happy with their mother abandoning them. She took them to a Salvation Army shelter there in New York and acted like that they were going to spend the night there. And then when her son fell asleep, she told her daughter that she was going to go leave to get them some food and walked out and never looked back. So again, this shows you either that she was a little mentally unstable, or it shows you the real strength of the feelings that she had for Ray and the kind of the influence and the power he kind of had over her.
You would know this better than I would, but serial killers, I mean, the killing is what it's for. They kill to kill. That's what makes where they get their enjoyment from. This couple, it seemed like murder wasn't really the motivation, but it was more of a consequence.
Yeah, no, I would say that's accurate. They're not killing because they enjoy it necessarily. Although, Ray did show a lot of signs of having this psychopathic personality. He lived this very parasitic lifestyle, which is something that you come across with psychopaths. His lack of responsibility for his actions, being prone to fits of anger, suddenly becoming violent, all these kind of things. This Mr. Hyde side of him, maybe that there was a little something going on there as far as maybe not, if not enjoying it, then kind of having a need to do it. But certainly I would say the greater influence there, the greater weight, not the killing itself, but the killing as a means to the end, which is getting rid of these women and being able to have access to their finances.
What led to their downfall? How'd they get caught?
After conning, quite a few women this way with this sister-brother act thing that they had going on, they ended up meeting the Downing woman in Michigan, who had the 2-year-old daughter. And they went out there, met her, stayed with her, and started conning her again for her money and things. And what happened was the woman ended up missing her cycle and was worried that she was pregnant. And so by that time, she was pretty friendly with Martha Beck and kind of considered her as a sister almost by that point. So she confided in her, and Martha said, "Oh, don't worry, I can help you out." And what she did is she gave her a bunch of sleeping pills, essentially, saying that if she took them, that would take care of the problem. So the woman, Downing, took the pills and things, and her daughter came in and kind of saw her in this state, almost unconscious state, and started crying and things. And Ray had one of his outbursts, I guess. And what he did is he went in another room and grabbed a gun that had been owned by this widow's, deceased husband. Got this gun, came back in, and shot her in the head and killed her. A few days after that, a day or two after that, they ended up killing the little girl. At first, they thought they would try to keep her, and then they decided that wasn't really feasible. So Martha ended up drowning the little girl, and they buried both of them in the house, in the basement. And after that, they went out into town, went to a movie, actually, which is kind of an interesting thing to do right after you've killed a couple of people. They went to a movie, and when they came back, to the house there. They had just got inside, no more than a couple minutes, and there was a knock at the door, and it was the police. The neighbors had called and asked for a welfare check because they hadn't seen Downing or her daughter for quite a while. So the police showed up there and asked, where they were, what happened, and Ray said, "Oh, she had a family emergency, had to go away for that, so we're just kind of watching the house." Police said, "Well, do you mind if we come in and look around?" And he said, "No, fine." Obviously confident that he had concealed the bodies sufficiently, but they went down to the basement and they noticed the cement seemed fairly fresh, and they ended up finding the bodies. And the little girl's body was reportedly was still warm when they found her, so it hadn't been long when they discovered them. So of course they were arrested at that point. While they were in custody, Ray ended up admitting that they were involved with the Janet Faye murder in New York. So then there was kind of a battle between New York and the Michigan authorities there about, well, where would they be tried? And Michigan at the time did not have the death penalty, but New York did. So there was a big push by New York to extradite Ray and Martha there to stand trial so that they could face the death penalty.
And for the trial, the press picked it up pretty quickly, and it was, sensationalized at the time. Would you compare it to, something of O.J. Simpson and how the public and media, really everyone, seemed to be enamored with the killings and the case?
It was a huge media sensation. It really became an event. There in New York, where the trial was going on, the courtroom was packed throughout the trial. Oftentimes, people were fighting to get in, to get seats. The crowd was overflowing into the corridors and things. They had to call in extra police to deal with the crowds and things. And one of the interesting things was that from all the reports, that a lot of these people trying to watch this proceedings were women. So women were really drawn to this case, maybe because it's involves a woman who's, acting in the name of love and pursuing this person that she is romantically attached to. The women were really interested in that. And, also at the time, some of the stuff that came out in trial was pretty scandalous. There was testimony by both Ray and Martha about their sexual activities together, which, back in the early 50s, wasn't something that was openly discussed. Certainly,
it's described. I mean,
most people even.
No, please.
Yeah, most people even today don't go around,
talking about that in public.
About sexual activities. So yeah, so back then it was like really scandalous to be hearing about these sorts of things.
And some of these sexual practices are described as abnormal. Is it abnormal, or was it just kinky and that's considered abnormal at the time?
That depends. It's in the eye of the beholder, right?
True. Well, what were some of these abnormal things that they were doing? You have any examples?
Also, they testified in detail about the oral sex practices that they engaged in. In real detail about that, which was something pretty shocking back then. They also talked about, playing strip poker with another woman, and having a bet about, well, whoever wins gets to have sex with Ray, and this kind of thing. So that sort of stuff. So it's definitely things that the average American citizen at the time would find pretty shocking, I would think.
Did you find any other interesting or revelatory information now researching in hindsight that maybe hasn't necessarily was publicized then or really now?
Well, I don't know if I would put it in those terms, but there were things from the trial that really stood out to me. One was this theme that I touched on before about love and what someone will do in the name of love. The attorney for Ray and Martha brought this up in his closing. He really hit on it. He talked about how Martha had become so wrapped up in Ray that he said she was just like another hand to him. So in other words, just a hand that he could manipulate and do things with however he, wanted to. She would do whatever he wanted. He said, nobody can say why one person feels love for another. Nobody can say why, why a king would marry a commoner. And that he touched on how love is this theme that's been written about, throughout history, and still is. Love is what really drove Martha to do what she did. And this passion she had for Ray really drove her to do what she did. And, this is something that came out after they were convicted. The jury found them both guilty. They were sentenced to death penalty, to be electrocuted. And they went to Sing Sing prison, the famous prison Sing Sing, where electrocutions really became famous. A lot of high-profile cases went through there. Shortly before their execution, this theme comes up again. Martha issued a last statement shortly before she was taken in to be electrocuted. She said, "My story is a love story, but only those tortured with love can understand what I mean." And of course, that's where the title of the book, Tortured with Love, comes from. She again, professes this love for Ray, and Ray did the same thing for her. And so, in their minds, they were probably hoping that they could be together again in the afterlife.
And I find those last words hilarious because in prison he was still professing his love to his first wife. She, at one point, talking about Fernandez, says, "It takes a man to kill himself, not a sniveling, low-down, double-crossing, lying rat like him." So I find that kind of funny, but I guess love and hate are two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, he was quite the Casanova. I mean, he, as you said, he was still writing his wife back, who was still in Spain. They were exchanging letters while he was in prison there, and he was professing love for her, while at the same time also had a love for Martha. He apparently had a very very big heart, or a very deluded one.
Yeah, I think we know which one. I guess I find solace in the fact that Fernandez had to be carried to the chair. Martha is quoted as saying, "Electric chair scares me." So they probably were pretty terrified of dying. So I guess in that way, I find some solace in their death, or at least being scared of death.
Well, there's certainly a sense of justice being served ultimately, which is always nice in these sorts of stories. It's always good to have this sort of closure at the end.
Tell listeners where they can get more information about you, the book, and your other materials.
Oh, my webpage is www.jthunter.org. I'm also on social media. I'm on Facebook, JT Hunter. I'm also on Instagram at JT Hunter TC, and then Twitter, JTH True Crime. So you can check me out any of those places. And Torture with Love is on Amazon, as are my other books as well.
JT Hunter, we appreciate what you're doing here, and Mind's Eye wrap up when we come back. Mind's Eye wrap up, and this one is for the summertime. That's right. I have to take a break too. I'm just going to take a little bit of a break, soak up the summertime sun, and I know you're going to be waiting on bated breath for me to come back, but don't forget to catch up on our latest shows. If you missed any, the archives right now are completely free. They're available on our website, themindsEyemedia.com. You can find the links to all the major platforms, so make sure you listen to them before maybe you can't. When we come back in September, there might be a new blog. I'm trying to get that right before Election Day, and it kind of talks about some of the things that are happening right now, so expect that. Obviously some new episodes and maybe some other things which I possibly just alluded to when the Mind's Eye returns in September. Until then, truly be well and let well be. Have a great summer, y'all. I'm DJ BJ Turnoff, signing off for the Mind's Eye.